John F. is our first speaker today. John's been around for many years. Don't know him really well, but I know we know each other through AA. That's about it, and that's enough. You know what I mean? We know a lot about each other just because we're in this same room together, right? And that's the beautiful thing about this program. So, help me welcome John F. One thing too, before we get going, I am going to be recording the speakers today. If for any reason you do not want me to record the audio of you, and later on I put them on YouTube for two reasons. One, because I believe recorded speaker meetings on the internet save my life. And two, I believe our recorded history is important. But there's no bad reason. If you do not want your recorded audio on my YouTube channel, please let me know, and I will not put it on there. I'll destroy it, whatever. But I will be recording up here. Thank you. John, take it away.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Good morning. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to be honest. This is my first time sharing my story, so please bear with me if I get lost or stumble at some times. I do have my printed out copy of my story. Can everybody hear me? So I'll have that in case I stumble. But I want to share my experience, strength, and hope. This all started many years ago, and I found some common themes throughout my life. I always prided myself on honesty, but there were different times in my life I wasn't as honest as I would even admit to myself. My story includes tragedy, depression, anxiety. I'm sure most of you can probably relate to that. I was born in western South Dakota and grew up on a ranch, and we moved to Wyoming for about 7 years. Back in the mid-70s, and I was about 14 years old, and every spring we branded calves, and I felt that I was becoming a man. I did a man's share of the work, and I was pretty proud of myself. One of the things I was always looking for, and that started early, was the approval of my father. So after we branded all the calves, for some reason I went to the cooler and I pulled out a beer. It was probably Coors because we were in Wyoming, I don't remember. And I remember popping that top, and I thought somebody was going to stop me, but no one did. So I had some younger brothers there and cousins, and I drank that first beer. I remember the burn, going down my throat. I remember, hey, this is something I kind of like. And it wasn't a full-on onslaught at that point. I was pretty young, so that was the beginning, I would say, other than taking sips of Dad's beer, after work. We spent some time in Wyoming, and then we ended up, we were still living in Wyoming, and I was old enough to have a job, so I got sent back to South Dakota to help my uncle, and I was a ranch hand, hay fields and working cattle and all kinds of stuff like that. And I was still pretty young, but my brother and older cousin were going to a party, and I asked my uncle, if I could go. And I remember him saying, yeah, you can go with them, but don't drink. And of course, that went in one ear and out the other. And I remember standing there, and I wasn't drinking any beer or anything, and someone walked by with a brown paper bag and started asking the people that I was with if they would like a drink, and they all refused because we couldn't see what was in the bag. But of course, me wanting to be the adult, wanting to grow up, wanting to get everyone's approval, yeah, I'll take it. And I'm afraid it was Everclear. And I remember, oh my gosh, that burned all the way down, and it sat there in my stomach, and I just remember it took days to work that through my system. Oh my gosh. And I don't remember if I told my uncle or if he asked. Maybe someone told him. You know how it works. He said, "Did you drink last night?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "I asked you not to." And I said, "Oh, I just had the one drink, So in my mind, it was just fine. I remember when I was very young, I was probably, I would say 7 or 8 years old, and I was talking to my mother, and I lied to her about something insignificant, and I think she caught on right away because she asked me a question about my story, and the lie grew, and then she asked me another question, and the lie grew, and I think she knew what she was doing because eventually I got myself into a ridiculous corner, and nobody in their right mind would have believed anything that I'd said. And then she just quit asking questions. And I thought, well, that's odd. But then I kind of thought it through, and I thought, well, she knew what was going on all the while. So she was trying to teach me a lesson about lying, and I decided I probably wouldn't do that again. I talked to her many years later about it, and she doesn't remember the story, but I appreciate what she did for me at that time. When we were in Wyoming, it was early 80s, and my father had an episode at work, and it was explained to me that he was sick, and we didn't know what was going on. That's when his health problems started. He was unable to keep a job, so we ended up moving back to South Dakota and rented a house until there was a ranch that came up for sale, and they ended up buying it. And later on, we found out that he had lupus and he had heart disease. So there were good days and bad, but I was still in high school, and I did the ranch work and grinding corn for the hogs and stuff like that. So I figured I was pretty grown up. So that led to more drinking, unfortunately. I started in my junior year in high school in my hometown when we moved back from Wyoming. And everybody'd been going to school for years together. I just felt like I was the odd person out, which ended up, I had to prove myself somehow. And, that alcohol kind of leveled the playing field. As long as I was drinking, I fit in with the cool crowd, and, I was accepted. And I think that was the main theme throughout most of my drinking career. It was just to get accepted. I started, I grew a mustache before I was 18, I think, and I started buying at the liquor store because I looked old enough. Well, then I became more popular because I was able to procure alcohol for, younger cousins and friends like that weren't old enough. And luckily, I never had any car wrecks or anything at that point. I think it was between my junior and senior year, I got a job as a ranch hand, imagine that. And it was working for a couple families of Germans. And they had cattle, they had wheat and oats and stuff like that, so we always had something to do. But I'd never worked for people like this before. They didn't take water jugs to the field. They had coolers. They had 6-pack coolers in the combine and 48-quart coolers in the trucks. And that probably wasn't the best place to be. But, it just led to developing a tolerance for alcohol, I would say. So I remember we'd go out to the wheat field and it could be 9 a.m. in the morning, greasing the combine, getting ready to go for the day. And if I got thirsty, I just popped a top. And that made for a long day sometimes. Getting that truck loaded full of wheat and driving it back to the ranch, that probably could have been a recipe for disaster. I remember one time we were finishing up on a field and I was driving an old 1964 Chevy truck and single axle, and I don't remember if it was 300 bushel or whatever, but I'm pretty sure we had close to 400 bushel on the last load. So the box sides were bowed and it was way too heavy. And of course we were sitting around drinking beer. I don't know if we were playing horseshoes. That was a favorite thing to do when we couldn't be harvesting. So they started talking amongst themselves. There were 2 brothers and then, I don't know, 4 sons, I think, at that point. And, they were just chatting away and said, who's going to drive this truck home? And, let's get the hired man to do it. Well, that was a great idea for them, not so much for me. It was dark, and I was going down what they called Quiver Hill, and at the bottom was Bear Creek. And I remember going down that hill, and it was one of those dark nights. I don't know if it was overcast or the moon was in a dark phase, but the lights went off on the truck. And I immediately woke up and started panicking because I knew there was a curve coming up and I did not know where it was exactly. So I grabbed the light switch and I was trying to get the lights to come on and they wouldn't. I was about ready to open the door and bail out because I wasn't going down with that ship. And I remember back in the day, the high-low beam switch was on the floor. And for some reason, I thought about it and hit the light switch, and the lights came back on, thank God. Oh, that would have been a disaster. But that was just one example. When you drink all day and get into that kind of situation, it got a little dangerous at times. I was involved in FFA in high school. I ended up being the chapter president. We went to some type of event in Rapid City and got done in, middle afternoon or something like that. And the driver, who was also the advisor, he decided we were going to stop at this little mini mall. I don't remember what he was getting, but there happened to be a liquor store there. What a great idea it would be to go buy, a 12-pack and share it with my friends. Probably not a good idea. We drank it quickly, of course, to not get caught. But I can imagine now him stepping into that little bus and smelling alcohol, and I just can't imagine what he was thinking, you dumbasses. But that was all on me. One story I forgot to mention, before we left Wyoming, somebody had the great idea to get some beer for the ride home. It was the last day of school, and we were all in the back of the bus drinking, and I don't remember, somehow we got caught, and being the last day of school, what could they do to us, right? Well, then we moved to South Dakota, and of course, they told the principal, and we got expelled the first day of school and the new school year, new town. And I remember we missed several days, but of course, when I got to school, they thought, oh, you must be a bad boy, because you were drinking on the bus. So, part of it part of it worked out in my plan. Probably not the best reputation one wanted to get. In high school, when we got bored, we'd just get a case of beer and drink and drive around. That's what we used to do. And we never got caught. We never got pulled over. I don't know how that works, but one Wednesday night, I'd already been confirmed in the Catholic Church in Wyoming, but they had a different program in South Dakota, so my parents insisted that I attend the religious education classes again that I'd already been through, and I thought that was ridiculous. So sometimes we would skip religious education class and get some beer and go drive around, because that's what we did. And it always came back to haunt me. My parents would find out, and there would be consequences. I don't remember what at the time, but I didn't really care. I turned 17 December 28th of, I think it was 1981. I don't remember if it was on a Friday, but the next day, tragedy struck. I took my three little brothers over to my uncle's house. I was working on a piece of equipment in the shop, and my uncle had two boys, so they were all running around together. And it was a decent, warm enough day, so they were out by the corral with the cattle and stuff. I don't know what they were doing. I wasn't keeping a very good eye on them. And a little time went by, and I looked up, and my uncle had my little 2-year-old brother in his arms, and he was running the Quonset. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I think I ran over Kevin." And my heart just sank. It was like, you could have knocked me over with a feather. It was just so surreal. I don't know if anybody's ever been in that position, but how can this be happening, And there wasn't anybody else around. It was just my uncle and I and the 5 boys. So we all piled in my dad's pickup, which was an extended cab. My uncle was driving, and I had to hold Kevin in my arms. He was unconscious at the time. But on the way to town, it probably took us, at least 20 minutes to get there. And I'll never forget this. I mean, that kind of experience. He would wake up and he would cry, and I'd try to comfort him because I had nothing, nothing I could do. There weren't too many visible signs, so, I just tried to make him as comfortable as I could. We got to the hospital, and, family started showing up. I think my brother headed back to Casper, Wyoming to go back to college. I don't know. My sister might have been spending time with her cousin. My parents were gone. They all started showing up, and we believed in the power of prayer, so we started praying. And, inside of you, you want everything to be okay, but after 4 hours, he passed away, which was just shocking. You think someone that had survived that long might have a chance, but the internal damage was just too much, and there wasn't much they could do, honestly. So that was very, very traumatic. Of course, then the blame game started, but no one was blaming anyone else. But of course, my parents blamed themselves. They shouldn't have been gone. They should have had somebody watching the boys. I blamed myself because I wasn't keeping a very good eye on them. My brother blamed himself. My sister blamed herself. My uncle blamed himself because he'd already fed the cattle, and there must have been a storm coming in, so he decided to give him another couple bales, and Kevin somehow got separated from the other boys. He didn't see him until it was too late. I don't know actually what happened. I did not witness anything. What a what a life-changing event. I mean, it just shocked the whole family. It was just a lot to handle, especially, when I was responsible for their safety. And I took it pretty hard. It was hard to function in day-to-day life, knowing that he was gone. And I didn't know about the stages of grief then, but I do now. So I went through bargaining and anger and depression and denial. And, I asked God, why didn't you take me instead of that innocent 2-year-old boy? I've lived a good life. I was 17. But no matter how I tried to justify it in my mind, I couldn't. It was just, it was almost too much to handle. And I think I started drinking a little bit more to cope. One story I want to share that I didn't have written down here. There's a reason for everything. God's got a plan, and I truly believe a lot of us are here because of His mercy and grace. I know I am, and thank God. I mean, I don't know what my purpose is other than, trying to provide a living for the family and take care of stuff. But it was years later, and I think we'd gone to another funeral. I think it might have been my father's, but I haven't got to that point yet. My youngest uncle on my dad's side stopped us on the side of the road, and he said, "Do you remember when Kevin died?" Well, of course we do. And he said, I have a story to share with you. And he said, I was pretty much an agnostic at that point. He was raised in the Catholic Church, but he'd gotten separated from God, and he was kind of making his own path. It happened to a lot of us. We get out on our own and we kind of go astray. But he said that after Kevin died, he was trying to justify it in his mind like all the rest of us. And he just couldn't reconcile what had happened and how it made him feel, and how could there be a God, and how could he take a 2-year-old boy like that? And he ended up giving his life to Christ after that because it didn't make sense, in the science book and logic. So that is one thing that came about because we lost my little brother. I graduated high school, but I wasn't on the ball. I ended up registering late, and all the good classes were taken, and I got to college, and I ended up taking some upper level classes my freshman and sophomore year. So it was a little more difficult, and I certainly wasn't applying myself. I was too busy partying. So it was the first couple of years were pretty tough, but that was all my own doing. I got my freedom, and it didn't matter if it was a weeknight or afternoon. The party's on. I got to think of where I was going. So I didn't have a car at the time. My mother and my little brother gave me a ride, and it was roughly 4 hours from home. And I had a suitcase and a blanket and a pillow. And I didn't have much. And I remember that first day I met my roommate, and he introduced me to some people. And later that night, some of his friends asked me out, and I said, I'm not old enough to go to the bar. And they said, that's okay, we know the owner. Oh, what a great recipe, So I ended up going out that night, and I got drunk, not too drunk, not blind drunk. And these two guys knew the game. They'd been around for a while, and they said, John, you drive. So I was driving their car. We just met that day. Well, I'm hungry. Let's go through Burger King. So that's a great idea. So we went there and ordered our stuff, and these two were hockey players from Minnesota, if I remember correctly. So we'd gotten our order. I don't think we'd even gotten away from the window, and they got into a little argument, and all of a sudden fists are flying and French fries are floating around the car, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? They thought it was great fun. That was just part of the deal for them. My gosh. I remember I had a late Tuesday class. It was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So Monday night, of course, the party's on. And I ended up, I couldn't find anybody to drink with, but I had 2 beers in the fridge, I think. So I finished those, and that certainly wasn't enough. So I talked my roommate's girlfriend into giving me a ride to the liquor store or wherever, and she was old enough. It was odd because when I turned 18, the drinking age was 18. 6 months later, it turned to 19. All of a sudden, I couldn't drink, but his girlfriend was 19, so that all worked out just fine. So we went and got a 12-pack, and of course, none of them were drinking, so I finished that. And they wanted to go to bed, and I didn't want to keep them up, so I just left the room. This is in the dorms, and I heard some noise going on across the hall. So I thought, well, these people are up, and they're having fun, so I'm going to check that out. I knocked on the door, and all of a sudden it got quiet. Who is it? It's John. Oh, let Johnny in. Oh, yeah, we're going to have a party. So I come in and all through high school, I'd made myself a pledge. I wasn't going to get into drugs. And I told them that when I walked in because they were smoking marijuana. And they tried getting me to indulge, and I refused. And so they said, let's get Johnny high. So they started blowing it in my face, And it worked. Later that night, we decided to have breakfast. Everything was closed, so we were going to drive from Brookings to Sioux Falls to have breakfast at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. I had befriended a couple twins. They had I don't remember, a Trans Am or something like that. Oh, I was cool now because I was hanging out with the cool kids again. I remember driving down the road, and he said, "You want a cigarette?" Well, yeah, I want a cigarette. So he gave me one, and I sat there trying to light it, and it smelled funny, and I just didn't get it because I'd already had, 14 beers or whatever I drank by then. And I think he turned on the light, and he grabbed the cigarette, and he said, "You're trying to light the filter," and knocked it out of my mouth. I just thought, oh my gosh. Well, then, I had a taste of the marijuana, so I thought, I wonder what it'd be like if I actually did it myself, Down the road we go. Yeah, sure, it made me feel right, but the next day, I was just exhausted. I don't know how to describe. No energy, didn't go to class, didn't care. So after 2 years of school, my grade point was actually below 2 out of 4. So that wasn't good. They placed me on academic probation. I lost my financial aid. I went back that summer to work at home to help Dad out on the ranch. And it must have been close to, the end of the summer. And we went to my grandmother's house after church, I would imagine. And she was talking to me, asking, "John, what are you going to do? I heard you had some trouble in college." And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to Brookings. I'll go back there and I'll get a job and save money until I have enough to continue school." Well, I think we all know what would have happened. That wouldn't have went too well. So she said, "Well, how much money do you need? How much are you short?" And I said, well, I have this much, but I need this much. And she said, well, if I loan you that money, will you promise to get good grades? And I thought, well, I could do that, I guess. But thank goodness, because she lent me the money and I buckled down, developed good study habits, and I ended up on the dean's list 3 out of the last 4 semesters. And I had that ability all along, I just didn't want to do it. My GPA ended up, I don't think it was 3, I think it was like 2.9 or something. That was a lot of work to move it up just a little bit, but that's the price we pay when we put alcohol in front of other things. So thank goodness she lent me the money. I did pay her back. I ended up getting a good job out of college. Moved about an hour and a half away from home, I would say. Developed some new friends. Yeah, we drank. That went on, I don't know, less than a year, I would say. I remember at that time I had an old 1971 Plymouth Satellite that ran good and everything was, hunky-dory other than maybe a little air leak on the passenger side. We just shove a pillow over there and solve that problem. But I thought a man in my stature, I worked for Farmers Home Administration at that time, and I thought a man of my stature ought to have a newer vehicle. So I talked to my dad about it, and he said, I think you should pay off your loans first and get the car later. What great advice, but I was all of, 22 years old, and, no, I want the new car. So I ended up getting a newer vehicle and traded off the old 71 Plymouth, which you know how that works. It didn't get me anywhere. I just had a car payment. So I ended up getting transferred to another location. Everything was fine. I found a nice basement apartment and I was chill. And then someone that I had gone to college with got a job there. And he was pretty hardcore, so you know how that went. We went out every night. We'd go to neighboring towns and drive everywhere. And I figured it out one time. My alcohol bill was more than my car payment. So, probably not a good recipe. I remember one night we ended up north of Sioux Falls and decided we were going to go to Sioux Falls. We were traveling down Interstate 29, and I had the cruise set, and maybe I was tired, maybe I was close to blackout, I don't remember, but the car ended up going off the road into the median, and of course we both woke up. I guess he must have been sleeping too, and I didn't even kick the cruise off. I just steered it back onto the interstate, and it's just amazing that we all survived that kind of thing. And I thought nothing of it at the time. I mean, if we'd slid sideways and rolled that car, we'd both be dead. It would just be over in a matter of seconds. But somehow, God had mercy on me, and we made it back to the highway, and everything was fine. I ended up, I got tired of the government regulations and stuff, and I ended up getting a job with Farm Credit Services in Winter, South Dakota, which was another hour and a half from home, roughly. And I thought that was a great idea because I was closer to home, and I could help out on the ranch because Dad wasn't doing well. They had him on all kinds of medications, but they still didn't know what was going on. So I started my new job there, and I don't remember, somebody introduced me to my new drinking friend, and unfortunately he was going through a divorce, and he would drag me out to the bar every night. At at that time I was drinking beer and vodka and stuff like that. Well, he introduced me to whiskey, and I developed quite a taste for that. There were times I was tired, I was broke, and I just wanted to stay home, and he would call me and say, "Hey, you want to go out tonight?" No, I do not. But he was persistent. He said, "I'll come get you when I get done with chores." And he would, and we would go out again. It just seemed like it was a never-ending wheel. I don't know if I attracted that kind of person, or, part of me just had that desire to drink all the time. It must have been a weekend, and we had lunch at Pizza Hut because they had beer. And then we all piled in the car, and we ended up going to Nebraska, and we went to a dance and did donuts on the highway and just had a great old time. We got back to Pizza Hut, I imagine it was 1 a.m. in the morning, and I dropped them off at their vehicles, and for some reason I thought I would show them how much power it had, so I spun out leaving the driveway onto the highway. Little did I know there was a cop watching. So I got pulled over after 12 hours of drinking. I thought I was in serious trouble. But I think I was polite and I was quiet, and I didn't actually volunteer any information. So they pulled me over and started taking alcohol out of the car. And they put it on the roof so that everybody that drove past could see what we were drinking. And they just kept finding more and more and more. And there were some bottles that I didn't even recognize. I'm like, where the hell did this come from? And of course, everybody was gone. It was just me and the cops. And I thought, oh man, I'm in big trouble. And I don't know if they knew who I was. I don't remember what the cause, but they decided to give me a ride home. And they impounded my car, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to jail? Okay. So the next day, when I sobered up, I went and got my car, and I thought, well, that was no problem. Why stop now? I met a gal in winter. We were getting along pretty well, dating exclusively. I went on vacation. When I got back, I found out she'd taken another job in another town. And I thought, well, being together, shouldn't that have been a we decision? And she said, well, you were gone and I needed to give them an answer, so I did. And that kind of hurt my feelings, but I was still a scamp anyway. I'd seen another woman on vacation. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't physical, but it would have been if she'd have said yes. So I got back and played innocent, and she moved to Sioux Falls, and I thought I ought to move to Sioux Falls too. So I did. I found a good job. Back at that time, I was a successful applicant out of 90 some, so I thought I was pretty special. And I ended up at Norwest Regional Operations Center out by the airport and developed some new drinking buddies there. We know how that works. It was off again, on again with that gal, and we ended up engaged at one point, and then we decided not to, and then she actually proposed a second time, and that was a little bit awkward. She put little notes around my apartment, and of course my brain said, well, where would she be? She'd be in the shower. So I just went and whipped open the curtain, and there she was. And she didn't have a ring. She just had a little piece of tinfoil that she'd made into it. And, will you marry me? And I thought, can I think about it? So that was awkward. We did end up engaged twice, and as God would have it, we didn't end up getting married, and I'm sure that was, an unanswered prayer, if you're familiar with how that works. Then my employer asked me to move to a neighboring town, and I had heard that their manager was an alcoholic. Well, I couldn't work for an alcoholic. So I told them no, and they asked again, and I told them no, and they asked again, and I said, well, maybe. And he said, well, John, it's not that we're going to fire you, but we really want you there. So I ended up moving again, another new job. Of course, I met some more drinking friends. And we would go out after work, and everybody'd go home. Of course, I didn't have anybody to, no one at home, so I'd take any excuse and stay at the bar, just try to stay away from home. And I think at that point, I was just avoiding whatever I had inside that I was trying to avoid. Kicking the can down the road, that happens with us alcoholics. Sometimes I'll take care of it tomorrow. I remember I stayed at the bar way too long, and they had asked me to do a couple commercials in Sioux Falls the next morning. I was driving home. I'm not sure if I fell asleep or I blacked out. I ended up, going in the ditch. It was wintertime. I did not drive out. I started shoveling, and I wouldn't let myself call anyone because I can handle this stuff. But the ditch was so steep, even though I shoveled for quite some time, I could not make it out. I ended up calling a friend, and he gave me a ride home. Well, no, he pulled me out. We got the pickup out. And then, of course, it's 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I don't remember. It was late. And I had to be in Sioux Falls roughly an hour away at 8 a.m. So I slept for a couple hours. Of course, I had to take a shower, put my suit on, and I made it. But those bright lights on the stage, man, that's no joke. I was sweating. I don't know why though. Could have been the alcohol coming out of my system. I got through that. Losing my place here. Oh, so I moved out into the country and had an old farmhouse, decided to get a horse, and I started team roping again. And we had a roping arena in Scotland, South Dakota, and I remember one night we were practicing, and I remember a gal pushing a little baby carriage up there, and gosh, she was cute, I thought I ought to get to know her name. So I did ask somebody, and no, she wasn't married. She had a child out of wedlock, and I can fix her. So we got introduced, and we started dating. I will spare you all the details, but we got together. I think it was the first night, which was probably a mistake, but looking back, we were great together. It was working out really well, and she was having trouble with the pill, so I talked her into going off of it, which you know how that works. We got pregnant. It was really odd. I had a clock, I think, next to my bed. And at the moment of conception, or shortly around that time, the clock stopped. I don't know what kind of sign that was, but it made me a little nervous. But I was going to be the stand-up kind of guy, and I was going to marry her, and we were going to live happily ever after. We had some trouble setting up the minister in the church, and being Catholic, they wanted her to go to class. She did that. The minister was always asking the same question over and over again. I think he might have been from India, but he just didn't understand what was going on. How could she be pregnant if you're not married? Well, it's not that hard to figure out. I didn't think. We just did something we probably shouldn't have. And we were just having trouble communicating, and time went on, and we just couldn't get past the class, couldn't get the approval. So we ended up going to another priest, and he said, yeah, sure, I'll marry you. So we got all prepared in, I think it was 3 months. And yeah, it was roughly, I think we wanted to get married in March. It ended up being in June. And we got through that okay. And she was close to her due date. And we got married in June. This would have been September. I can't remember the exact date that she was due, but I got a call on the 29th of September, and tragedy had struck again. My aunt called. My wife, we were out riding horses. She was very pregnant, so the doctor didn't think that was a good idea. I was out with my brother-in-law and his girlfriend. She came driving out with the car and said, your aunt called and your dad had a heart attack. And I thought, oh my gosh, he'd had open heart surgery. They finally diagnosed him with lupus, but he was really struggling. And my brother-in-law took the horse, and I drove back with her, and I decided that it was probably a good idea for me to pack and go out there to support my mother and my younger sister that was still at home. And I think I was packing, and then we got another phone call, and it was my aunt. And she said, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your father didn't make it. And I'm like, what? He just had a heart attack. He'll be fine. But he was gone. And my gosh, how to come to grips with that in a couple minutes is beyond me. Yeah, he'd been sick for a long time, but the surgery worked, and he was doing just fine. My wife asked me if I wanted her to go with, and I said, well, of course I want you there. And she said, what are we going to do if I go into labor? And I said, God will take care of us. There's hospitals all the way along the highway. And, it made sense at the time. So I took her with me. We packed the baby seat and all the baby clothes and all that kind of stuff. And made it out there just fine. But unfortunately, my aunt couldn't get a hold of my other brothers and sisters, so I ended up calling them on the way. And that's the hardest thing I think I've ever done in my life, having to call and say, I'm sorry, our dad had a heart attack and died. And no, it was just too much. Later that night, my mom and sister had been with him at the time. They were at my aunt's and my grandmother's house. And I realized that I wasn't keeping very good tabs on time, but I have to finish this story. They got home much later. I think it was dark. And both sides of the family were there for support, uncles, aunts. And my mother sat down at the table and she said, I'm going to tell this story once. I don't want to have to retell it. So she said, we went to Grandma Juanita's, which was her mother, and my Aunt Betty, which was her oldest sister. We went to their place to apologize for something that happened a week ago. And my aunt was pretty livid. She'd obviously been thinking about it for quite a while, and she ended up attacking him, knocked him to the ground. She jumped off the porch, and they ended up rolling around. He sent my mother and sister into the house. And several minutes later, my aunt went in the house, said something unrelated, and then she said, you better go check on your husband. He's gurgling. So my mother went out there and he was already gone. He was face down in the dirt. And she'd had CPR training, so she started CPR right away. And, they drove to the closest hospital, but unfortunately, they couldn't save him. It was just too late. It was just too much. So she told me that story, and I thought, well, I think my aunt should probably be in the ground then. So I hadn't brought a gun, but I knew where my dad kept his gun, so I was formulating a plan to go and take her out. And, trying to figure out how to get the gun and the bullets out to the car and be gone for a couple hours and no one gets suspicious. And obviously it was taking a while to formulate this plan because there's no way in hell it would have worked. And I remember my Uncle Butch came out and he said, "I know what you're thinking, John." And I didn't say a word. I was just livid. How dare she? And he said, "You have a 9-month pregnant wife in the house. Whatever you decide today is going to affect the rest of your life." And it really woke me up. And I decided that I probably shouldn't do one of God's jobs, so I let it pass. Then we had a criminal trial. We had a civil trial. The criminal trial didn't go well. The civil suit didn't go well. It was a conservative county, and they ended up awarding my mother the cost of the funeral, which was about $11,000. So it was kind of a slap in the face. That was quite an adjustment for our family, and my mother was pretty well lost without him, so I helped as much as I could. Take care of the ranch and make decisions and do the financial end of it. It was pretty tough. She moved in with me a couple times. My sister moved in with me a couple times. But we got through it. But I need to fast forward on the story. I meant to set a timer on my phone when I started, but I was a little nervous, so I forgot.
You got 5 minutes to get sober.
Okay, 5 minutes to get sober. That's enough. Thank you, Marcia. I'm going to fast forward. That's actually my wife sitting there with the phone on the stand. She came to record my talk. And we reconnected, and we ended up falling in love, and we got married, and we joined our families. But of course, John was drinking too much. And my excuse was, this big family is just driving me nuts. So I just kept right on drinking. As soon as work was over, I'd just spin the cap off of that bottle. And, we'd had some discussions, and I knew I had a problem. I'd known it for 30 years, I finally got to the point where I was going to try to quit. And we all know how that ends up. I was sober for about 4 months. We went on a camping trip, and I snuck a couple vodka bottles to get me through the weekend. Well, one of them was almost gone before we even left the house, so that was awkward. We got there, and of course, the second bottle was gone the first night. Our daughter from South Dakota was going to come and camp with us, and I was trying to figure out how I could get more booze to get me through the weekend. And I was trying to find my money clip, but alcohol had played a factor in this brain of mine. I couldn't remember where I put it. So I ended up meeting her in town because it was a confusing campground. And I got back, and it was one of those overcast, gloomy weekends. I was sitting out by the fire by myself, and my wife brought out the vodka bottle, the empty vodka bottle. She said, "What's this?" I said, "An empty bottle." And she said, "What are we going to do about this?" I said, "Throw it in the fire." So that's what we did. I did struggle. I did have some relapses, and it was November. I took my stepsons hunting deer. We got a couple, hung them in the garage for a while. I was impatiently waiting for them to make time in their schedule so we could process the deer. Well, it didn't happen. So I'm going to drink over this. So I got my favorite Budweiser bottles, and I got my favorite Mr. Boston Blackberry Brandy, because I deserve only the best, right? And I got back and I started working, and I opened the Budweiser bottle, and somebody poured Dawn dishwashing liquid in it or something because it didn't taste right. And I swear it was sealed from the factory. And I didn't figure this out for a while. Well, I'm gonna try some brandy. And it was the same thing. You know, I broke the seal, but it didn't taste right. And I didn't finish it. I may have opened a couple bottles just to make sure how crazy I was, and I did not finish it. And that's the last time I drank. Because of God's grace and mercy, He knew I couldn't do it on my own. So He gave me a little nudge, and that's all it took to get me over the top, or whatever you want to call it. But I do want to give a special thanks to my wife, Jennifer. I didn't realize this until we were celebrating one of our sober anniversaries, and she gave a talk and said that I think part of the reason I'm with you is to save you, which meant from myself. And we all know, you know, it's all up to us as far as getting and staying sober, but without her support, it would have been a lot harder. So I appreciate you, Jennifer. And with that, I will close.
All right.